Hello and welcome to this week's Gig Harbor Market Update. It is Friday, December 8th, 2023. And we're going to be talking about the top 10 predictions for next year. And we're going to be using Matthew Gardner's. We're going to be watching his video and we're going to be looking at his top 10. Then we're going to be also looking at how I think the top 10 will play out, as well as in Gig Harbor specifically. So that's what we're going to talk about. My name is Christian. I'm a real estate agent here with Windermere and Gig Harbor. And I'm also I can help you build something on a challenging site. So if you have any questions about how to build on a steep slope, waterfront, or a wetland, and you like to have a design and build, well, talk to me. Let's talk. My contact information is down below. So anyway, without much further ado, let's get into the top 10.
You may remember that this was the #1 on my list last year, and so far my forecast was spot on. And the reason why I'm bringing it to your attention for a second year is because the market actually performed better in 2023 than I had expected. And this has led some to suggest that stubbornly high home values, along with significantly higher mortgage rates, are likely to lead the market to implode in 2024. But I find that highly implausible.
I agree. I don't see the amount of distressed sellers entering the market here in order to trigger any sort of bubble bursting. Yes, prices are high, but you need to have that influx of supply. And also during 2008, we had banks actually giving cash incentives for people to get out of their underwater homes so they could have a short sale. And that's definitely not happening at this time. And the amount of loans under 5% and the strict underwriting criteria, I think there is no housing bubble in sight, and just prices are going to remain high and flat as inflation kind of catches up. So if you've been waiting for housing prices to collapse, sorry, it's not happening. Well, hold on. We need to have widespread economic hardship in 2024 in order for us to see any sort of price collapse in the housing market. So unless a bunch of people lose their jobs and they can't pay any mortgages, I just don't see any distressed sellers entering the market next year.
That last year's forecast for rates to have started dropping earlier in 2023 and faster than they have was not accurate. Why? Well, the US economy proved to be significantly more resilient to the Fed, who are raising interest rates at the fastest pace in over 40 years. And this has led the Federal Reserve to keep borrowing rates higher, and likely for longer, as they continue to try and tame inflation. The data I'm looking at today, that shows inflation and the economy in general starting to slow. And this leads me to believe that mortgage rates have peaked, that they will continue to ease as we move through 2024. That said, I don't see rates dropping below 6% by the end of the year. Now I know this might sound depressing, but I'd still be far happier with a 6% mortgage than today's rate of close to 7.5%.
Again, I agree here. I don't see rates dropping too much. Currently, rates are in the low 7s, and I don't see them dropping much more. We're probably going to be in that 6 to 7 range here as the risk premium does come down and the market has a little bit more stability and are a little bit more confident in what the Fed's direction is here. But I mean, some people are expecting rates to fall really quickly like what they were pre-pandemic, but the only reason the Fed would do that is, well, let's take a look. So if we look at the Fed funds rate over, well, history, sorry if you can't see that, means zoom in a little bit. So this is the Fed funds rate, and the gray bars you see are recessions. And prior to every recession, the Fed tries to avert the recession by drastically lowering rates. So the only way that the Fed would start dropping rates here to mirror some of these other rate drops is if the economic situation is deteriorating quickly. And of course, when we have a recession, we do have tighter lending standards, which means even if you do get a 3% mortgage again, the banks might not want to give you a mortgage in the first place. They say it's too risky for us to do any loans. Sorry, you don't qualify for a mortgage. So I don't, hopefully we don't see that happen next year, but we can, never say never. And the market is thinking about, 0.5% there in a price and a Fed funds rate, and that is that could happen without any sort of economic recession on the forecast. As we can see here, they did drop rates a little bit, but 0.5% is not really gonna do anything that much in terms of the market. Now, what you can do is you can always buy down your rate if you can stay in your house for a long time. Buy it down to 5.5% or 5%, whatever you get a mortgage, and reduce your payments that way. But anyway, with that said, interest rates next year are going to probably be between 6 and 7%, unless, well, the economy goes to hell in a handbasket.
Last year, I suggested the number of sellers listing their homes in 2023 would be extremely low, and that forecast was correct. In 2024, I expect that we will see a modest increase in the number of sellers, but many will still be hesitant to sell and lose their current mortgage rate, which is well below where we are today. In fact, the most recent data I have shows that 80% of mortgaged homeowners have a mortgage rate of at or below 5%. But although they may not be inclined to sell right now, as and when rates fall to within 1 to 1.5% of the rate they currently hold, I believe that those who have been holding off will look seriously at listing their homes for sale.
I'm going to start sounding like a broken record here, but I do agree with Matthew here. I think that as mortgage rates slowly fall, incomes are slowly rising, and high interest rates become the new normal. I mean, people get pretty accustomed to things pretty quickly here. I think more people will consider selling their homes. I think Redfin said they expect a 5% uptick next year. We'll see what that means for Gardner in a second. But, not a lot of new listings, but people are getting more comfortable. And if you do have enough set aside again for doing a rate buy down, that might be just a ticket to reduce the monthly payments. And I think as the future appears a little bit more stable and certain among the population, really, that people will list because they have more confidence in the future. So let's get into the next one.
Most forecasters suggested that sale prices would fall in 2023, but that was not the case. The lack of inventory in the marketplace acted to prop up home values, and as I found it unlikely we would see either a meaningful increase in the number of homes for sale or significantly higher foreclosures, well, I didn't expect to see prices drop in 2023, and I'm not looking for them to fall in 2024 either. However, growth will come in at a very modest 1%, lower than has been seen in many years, but growth all the same.
All right, here I do kind of need a little bit more nuance in this answer. So I agree that sticker prices will remain relatively flat. Matthew predicts a 1% increase. I think Zillow is expecting a 0.2% decrease in prices, and Redfin is expecting a 1% drop in prices. So really, in an overall grand scheme of things, I would say that's pretty flat. I don't think prices are going to do much this year, just as like they didn't do much, well, last year. So prices in Gig Harbor, let's say November of last year to November of this year, were flat from $750 median sales price to $750 median sales price. We did have a small uptick, as I said in my last week's email, or that was this year. Anyway, it was a small uptick, but I don't know if that's going to be too meaningful in the grand scheme of things. But what happens is that, yes, prices remain flat. What people don't see is the lack of, or the fall in prices due, if you look at it in terms of purchasing power. That's basically $1 million in 1980 is no longer $1 million now, right? And that's the dollar eroding. So really, we had a crash in the value of the dollar. So when you have $1 million house last year to $1 million house this year, that house depreciated in terms of its purchasing power. So if you sold that house and had $1 million, now that $1 million is less, even though the house remained flat. So just how far your money will go, that's what is depreciating. So, the Fed says, or the government says we had about a 9% inflation. I'm building a house right now, a spec home, and it's costing me about 25% more than it did prior to the pandemic. So costs have gone up by 25%, and that's for trades, plumbing, HVAC, electricity, electricians. So all that, they basically doubled in prices, and that's translating to an overall cost increase of about 25%, which means I'm seeing an inflation of 25%. So if you take $1 million pre-pandemic, probably not $1 million now, and you have about in terms of me being able to build a house, even a 25% drop in the value of the dollar. So your house is actually dropped by 25%. And I don't think that's really incorporated in the data that they're looking at. So that's really the crash in housing prices, is the fact that your house is not as worth much in terms of purchasing power in the value of the dollar.
During the pandemic, there were a number of more affordable markets across the country that experienced very significant price increases, which were then followed by significant post-pandemic price declines. Now, I expected home prices in those areas to take longer to recover than the rest of the nation, but I've been quite frankly very surprised by how quickly prices have recovered, with most markets having either matched their historic highs or getting very close to it, even in the face of remarkably high borrowing costs. In 2024, I expect prices to match or exceed their 2022 highs in the vast majority of metropolitan areas across the country.
I'm not quite sure what data set he's looking at, but for instance, let me pull up Boise, Idaho here, and this dark blue line is the price peak in 2022, and this light blue line here is this year. And I really don't see this light blue line going all the way back up to the peak here. I think I wrote the prices down here. So the Boise needs to go up by 6%, and well, basically in 6 months, because that's usually the peak is in the middle of summer. So they need to go about 1% a month, which is a lot. What other, there was Phoenix. We can look at what's happened to their median sales price. This one is slowly catching up, but I don't know if it's going to really get up there in 1 year. The starkest one is, I know Austin suffered a lot, so we're going to see what happened to Austin, and they're still in a price decline, so they haven't even trended up again yet. So in order for them to catch up to 2022, they have to go up by 26%, and I don't see that happening. Sorry, Matthew, I will disagree with you here. I don't see prices going back up to 2022 highs.
Although new home construction remains tepid, builders are still benefiting from the lack of supply in the resale market, and they're taking greater market share, not only of sales, but of listings too. Now, although this might sound like a big positive for builders, it's coming at a cost. A recent report published by the National Association of Home Builders suggested that 32% of builders have been cutting home prices, and a full 62% of them were providing sales incentives, such as mortgage rate buy-downs. Now, although material costs have softened, it remains very hard for builders to deliver as much housing as is needed by the market.
In terms of new construction, yes, material prices have softened, which is great, but trades, again, like I talked about earlier, have not gone down in prices yet. I mean, a plumber is not going to say, oh, you know I'm going to charge less tomorrow. No, that's not going to happen. Prices for those trades are going to remain high, and they will continue to get passed on to the consumer. So I think new housing, yes, it's great because there's just not a lot of existing sales, resale homes for sale. So I think new construction will continue to be a greater part of the market share. But I don't think it'll help any affordability issues because interest rates will remain high, and builders also take construction loans to build new houses. So as long as interest rates remain really high and the price of the homes haven't caught up yet, the builders are waiting for this, the next wave in home prices, so things pencil out because they're not going to build things for free. So I think we're going to have less construction going forward into next year as interest rates remain above 6%, and I think affordability will be still a big factor. So I don't think these homes, as he was saying, are going to be reduced in price much more.
With home prices not contracting and the pace of borrowing costs far exceeding the pace of income growth, affordability will likely erode further in 2024. Now, of course, there are ways that affordability could improve, but it would require either a significant drop in home values, a significant drop in mortgage rates, a significant increase in household incomes, or a combination of all three. But I'm afraid I find this very unlikely. And the hardest hit due to the affordability or lack of it will be our younger first-time homebuyers. They're going to continue to find it very challenging when it comes to getting their foot on the first rung of the housing ladder.
I agree with Matthew here on all points except for one. I don't think falling mortgage rates are going to do much because, if anything, it'll bring out more buyers out of the woodworks and put even more competition amongst buyers, causing sellers then to raise prices, which means that lower interest rates mean lower monthly payments, but if the houses get more expensive, then you have, again, higher monthly payments. So I don't see that helping affordability at all. If anything, I think first-time buyers are going to be looking at house hacking, basically taking a single-family house and cutting it up and renting out individual bedrooms and putting like locks and stuff on it. So it is, I think lenders are looking into allowing that too. But it might be even a product that I build going forward in the future if that really becomes desirable for first-time home buyers, is buying a house that has a bathroom and a bedroom and a lock, or maybe an exterior. So every bedroom has an exterior door to it. That way everybody can not walk in each other's heads. So if that's interesting to you, let me know in the comments down below, and I can actually build that as a product to sell on the market. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
In last year's forecast, I suggested that governments, both national and local, would start to take housing in general and affordability specifically more seriously. That has certainly been the case, with several states enacting new land use policies aimed at releasing developable land. Naturally, I support these efforts, but I expect even more to be done in 2024. Specifically, I'm hoping that cities and counties not only continue easing their restrictive land use policies, but also continue to streamline the permitting process and take a close look at the fees that they're charging builders. These costs are passed on directly to the home buyer, which further impacts affordability. More needs to be done, and I'm hopeful that many markets across the country will step up to the plate and make some quantifiable changes.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with making it cheaper for builders, so yes. Specifically in the state of Washington, we've seen a lot already done this year in trying to increase the missing middle housing, specifically like Seattle. They won't enact anything until halfway through 2025, so that's nothing to do with next year. And on top of that, it's going to take another year to get through permitting, and on top of that, it's going to take another year to do construction. So we actually won't see any of these policies really go into effect. You know, the best timeline is until 2027. So it's just kind of a slow process. But in terms of even out here in Pierce County, yes, we have, you know, Tacoma, and they're trying to put density towards Tacoma, but they just turned a huge swath of KP into R10 zoning or R5, which means basically one residential unit on 10 acres. And that needs to be undone. That's just crazy. You can't have one house on 10 acres. Anyway, I can't speak too much of other cities or counties outside of Washington, but Washington's done a lot, and I think it'll just be here more digested going through next year, but nothing new, particularly in the state of Washington for zoning or this stuff.
Many expected that the end of forbearance would bring a veritable tsunami of homes to market, but they failed to appear. At its peak, almost 1 in 10 homes was in the programme, but today that's fallen to well below 1%. That said, I do expect foreclosure starts to pick back up, although I have to say that they remain well below pandemic levels. Now, I do expect delinquency levels to increase, rising in 2024, but they will simply be returning to the long-term average and are certainly not a cause for concern.
I agree with Matthew here. I don't think any sort of foreclosures are going to enter the market en masse. I pulled up a chart here that shows delinquency rates on single-family mortgages. It's basically people 30 days behind on their mortgage payments. 1.72%, and prior to the market crashing, we had between 4 and 2%. So not much in terms of people becoming distressed sellers here. So, and if you have a low interest rate mortgage specifically, you're basically shorting the dollar, which means your debt burden is becoming less and less and less as time goes on. So as your income goes up, the amount you have to owe to the bank goes down just by the fact that you took, let's say, $2,000 a month in a loan, but that $2,000 a month is going to be very little in the future. If like 15 years from now, it's like $2 grand is going to be nothing. So it's just like when you look at your parents and they're paying like $200 for their mortgage, you're like, wow, that's $200 for a mortgage, and that's the kind of reflection we have to look at from now going forward if you have a low interest. So anyway, let's get on to the next item. Yeah, so no deluge of foreclosures coming forward in 2024.
2023 will likely be remembered as the year when sales activity was at its lowest level since 2008, following the bursting of the housing bubble. As I explained earlier, I believe that we will see the number of existing homes coming to market improve modestly in 2024, which, in concert with mortgage rates starting with a 6 rather than a 7 for most of the year, should allow existing home sales to rise to around 4.4 million units. However, there will still be more demand than supply, and this will mean that owners will still have the upper hand in 2024.
Redfin thinks something similar is going to happen. Like Matthew just stated, he said 4.4. Redfin thinks 4.3 million sales in 2024, which is still 5% up from this year, which is great. However, that is still a listing crash here. I'll show you what 5% means in Gig Harbor. Let me pull it up here. So this is, we're on the trajectory to be just above 1,000 closes by the end of the year, which is about half of what we saw between 2014 and 2018. When here in 2018 we had over 2,000 homes for sale, and prior to that we had 1,800 or something like that. So we can see that listings are down between, let's say they're down by half. Really. So this listing crash is going to persist into next year. So if you're a buyer, you got to be ready to compromise on the house that you're looking at. And if you're a seller, now's a good time to sell because you have less competition, which is great. You don't have to lower your prices in order to get a buyer. You just have to sit on your hands a little bit longer. So Anyway, without much further ado, it's been a long video already. I'm glad you joined and you watched all the way to the end, and hopefully you have now more information to make an informed decision. Anyway, I'll see you again next week.